All right, this lecture is going to cover Susan Okin's article on gender inequality and cultural differences. And I guess further, we're going to wrap up the semester with issues pertaining to women's rights from a global moral perspective. So I guess global issues concerning women's rights as opposed to, I guess, local issues. Some brief background information. Okin recently passed away in 2004. She was a philosopher at Harvard University. And she and primarily focused on philosophical issues pertaining to feminism, as including the article we're covering today. She engaged with the works of Michael Walzer, Rawls, McIntyre, some of the figures. Well, we haven't read any Walzer this semester, but some of the others that we've engaged with this semester. Often as a critic, and other times utilizing some of their ideas for her own thought. And we'll see that come through in this piece as well today. So we'll kick off with some stage setting. Theories of justice such as Rawls have been challenged by many feminists, not including Okin. Okin's going to be responding to these feminists, but some of the challenges include, one, how can a theory be universal, like Rawls tries to be, and yet take into account all the differences there are amongst people spread throughout the world, without excluding certain groups? This has been raised by feminists as well as critical race theorists. Two, many feminist theories of justice tend to neglect other problems such as racism, classism, and religious biases. And three, they argue that if you tend to take into account differences, then it's actually hard to just have a universal theory to begin with. So this is kind of the challenge that Okin's going to take up. She's going to try to offer a feminist theory of justice that is universal but can account for differences without, unjustly excluding certain groups of people. So, here's the charge then against these theories of justice that are trying to be universal in scope. It is essentialist to talk about the problems of women as such. Okay, so there's this term essentialist that's being bandied about. And these critics, we could call them anti-essentialists. And in some circles in philosophy, essentialism is like a bad word. Now, in analytic philosophy, which you probably haven't heard of, it's not a bad word. But in continental philosophy, which is a movement that's, well, to give a rough characterization of it, it kind of started with a German philosopher, Martin Heidegger, and then it had influence over a bunch of French thinkers like Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, and then, but it's a different style of philosophy that we haven't really read much of that style in this seminar. Most of the stuff we read in this class, I guess you could broadly call it analytic, but it doesn't like essentialism. So what is essentialism? Well, here's a rough characterization as it pertains to women. There is a way of being unique. There is a way of being unique to a woman, such as, like, for example, a set of properties uniquely had by women, and which demarcate women from, say, men, and female animals that aren't human, for example. So just for example, an analogy, water has an essence. We could say that the essence of water is H2O, which is its molecular composition, what it's made out of, and how those molecules are kind of structured. Because it's not just those three molecules, it's how they're arranged. And you could say that's the essence of water, and that's what distinguishes water from other clear liquids, like certain types of alcohol. It's what picks out water and only water. Well, Okin is going to argue, some feminist thinkers think that there's an essence of being a human woman. There's a set of properties that pick out all and only human women and distinguish them from, men and perhaps female animals from other species. So these anti-essentialists then think that there's a problem. Mainly, the properties or a way of being that we would select and call the essence of being a human woman is really just the properties of women of a certain class, culture, and race, such as wealthy, middle to upper class Western white women. In which case it would exclude, say, African women or Middle Eastern women or Asian women. This is the charge. So then talk about women as such would really just be talk about middle-class white women. And that talk neglects women of other classes, races, and cultures. And much feminist theory was, in fact, primarily just concerned with high-class white women in Western Europe and the United States. And Okin goes through examples throughout the history of philosophy and throughout the history of feminist literature of, we're all about women that were advocating for women's rights, but really white women's rights. They didn't care about black women, and they didn't care about the rights of slaves. And that's deeply troubling. So the question is essentialism committed to this charge? Is that charge really applied to essentialism? One more startling aspect is most recent feminist theory is essentialist. So this is Okin's, I guess part of the goal of this article is to defend that you can be an essentialist feminist in spite of these charges, so to show that these charges are misguided, they miss the mark, they're inaccurate. And two, I think she's going to argue further that you should be an essentialist feminist. So she addresses a book by Spellman called Inessential Women. Spellman holds that the great mistakes of white middle-class feminists have been to exclude women different from themselves, or even when they are included to assume that whatever their differences, their experience of sexism is the same. So here's a brief history of feminism, and I'm far from being an expert on this. This is not my field, but I think most scholars say that feminism has come in 3 waves, at least in the United States. The first wave came in the early 20th century, late 19th century, and it dealt with issues such as women's suffrage, women's right to vote, and it accomplished a lot of good things. Then the second wave kind of came in the 60s, 70s, perhaps early 80s, and this was kind of the equal work, equal pay movement, and this is obviously, oversimplifying a very complicated history of a certain type of field, but it was the women on Wall Street. Women can do work just as well as men can. They should get equal pay. Anything a man can do, a woman can do. Gloria Steinem would be an example of that. And that was, those first 2 movements, especially the second, was predominantly, white middle-class American women. And they basically wanted to show that they wanted to basically get the prominence that white middle-class, upper-class men got. And they also accomplished a fair amount. And they did a lot of great things. But at the same time, the movement was very just kind of focused on their own needs and their own... And it didn't take into account the experience of Middle Eastern women, for example. African women and lower-class women in the United States, African-American women in the United States, Hispanic women. And it's just focused on one kind of subset. So this is, and what Spellman thinks is that the reason is because of this essentialist view. Well, Okin's going to find 3 problems with Spellman's claims, and I'm just kind of reviewing it. First, Okin claims that Spellman's claims are short on empirical evidence. If you're going to make a charge like that to a movement, that's the type of charge that is confirmed by evidence, but she is short on that. 2, contra Spellman, Okin says that you can't argue that sexism is an identifiable form of oppression without subscribing to the view that race and class oppression are insignificant. So basically, if Okin's right, Spellman's just committed a really bad logical fallacy. So suppose I am an environmentalist and I say that leaking pollutants into the Wabash River is bad. And then someone says, well, if you say that, what about all these other bad things, such as the pollution coming from cars released in the atmosphere? If you care about the pollution in the Wabash River, you obviously don't care about the pollutants from cars going into the atmosphere. And that's just ridiculous. Of course, being concerned with one thing is consistent with being concerned with other things, and it doesn't entail that you're not concerned or that it's not significant. 3, Spellman misplaces the burden of proof. So according to Okin, the burden of proof is actually on the anti-essentialist feminists to show that essentialist feminism doesn't properly take into account the experiences of non-Western women. Okay. And here's a quote from Okin. One of the problems of anti-essentialist feminism, shared I think with much of postmodernist critique, is that it tends to substitute the cry, we're all different, for both argument and evidence. So postmodernism many of you who are perhaps in anthropology or English might be familiar with this. It's loosely, it's a type of thought, kind of coming out of Western Europe in the kind of 70s, and it eschewed logical argumentation, generally. Just, it wasn't concerned with consistency or anything like that. Well, this Okin's saying, and this is, as the result is, you're not using good logical argumentation to support your claim when you're attacking another type of theory. And we're not obligated to accept that. So basically, ranting is not the same thing as an argument. Think about this, though, yourself. So I'm bringing up this point also. So most of you are probably on Facebook. Many of you perhaps have deeply held, passionate political opinions. There's the quote that, a Facebook status update rarely changes someone's mind. A picture that you post on your Facebook wall with a clever witticism about a political position is not the same thing as an argument. We live in kind of a soundbite culture. Don't think a soundbite's the same thing as an argument. I get frustrated when politicians are expected to explain something really complicated, like a budget in 10 seconds or less, $1 trillion budget in 10 seconds or less. Well, the same thing is, the more just passionately and emotionally holding a position and communicating that passionately is not the same thing as having a good argument for that position. And I'm not obligated to accept the position just because it was communicated to me by someone who's very passionate about it. They gotta have good reasons, and that's the point Okin's making. Alright, so let's get on to her thesis then. She writes, and I quote, "As I shall argue, this insulting conclusion that the problems of other women are similar to ours, but more so, is exactly the one I reach when I apply some Western feminist ideas about justice to the situations of poor women in many poor countries." So, in a sense, Okin's going to be on Team Rawls. Her targets would be akin to Team McIntyre and Team Height. So, and this is not completely accurate, but in a broad sense, this is the liberal versus communitarian particulars debate all over again. Only now it's being applied to women's rights, whereas earlier we looked at it in the context of patriotism. So this has been somewhat of a continuing theme in this course. It kind of keeps re-emerging in different debates. Well, so Okin's going to argue that women are oppressed, the sexism and the experience of women globally and the types of oppression they experience are the same in kind, just different in degree. So 2 squares, one with 3-inch sides, another with 9-inch sides, will be the same kind of shape, just it'd be a difference in size, difference in degree or quantity. One's smaller, one's larger. Or take 2 members of the same species, like 2 squirrels, but one's bigger than the other. We'd say they're the same kind of animal, just different in degree of size. Well, she's going to say that the types of oppression that women encounter are going to be the same in kind, just differ in degree. There's going to be differing degrees depending on where you're at in time and place. Contra what these anti-essentialist feminists say, who say that no, they're different in kind, therefore you can't generalize from your experience of. So to kind of tackle this and defend this thesis, Okin's going to look at 4 sets of issues. First, why has the issue of inequality between sexes been neglected for so long? Second, why does it matter? 3, what are the findings? And 4th, what are the policy implications of the findings? So let's get to the first one. Why has attention to gender been only recent? Why is it comparatively new? Well, she thinks that the assumption that the household, usually assumed to be male-headed, is the appropriate unit of analysis for economists, policy makers, etc. She thinks that it's that assumption.
The Woody Allen story.
Hey, I like my family as a friend.
All of who are orphans. Now to our story.
Now, mother and daughter put the finishing touches on the dinner.
With strychnine.
Salad needs more butter, Mother. a stranger enters.
Father, too, looks forward to this date with the family. He has had a hard day at the office, and in his briefcase are some contracts which must be looked over tonight.
Okay, buck up. Here we
But
go.
in the meantime, he
Martini.
will relax at dinner with those he loves.
Come on, come over here. How much are you earn today? Yeah,
These
come on,
boys
hand it over.
greet their dad as though they are genuinely glad to see him.
They're not, of
As
course.
though they had really missed being away from him during the day and are anxious to talk to him.
Pop cream.
This is the time for pleasant discussion in a thoroughly relaxed mood. They don't pick this time of the day to spring unpleasant surprises on Dad. If they have disagreeable news, they'll postpone the discussion until another time.
When he's asleep.
This is no time to dun Father for a raise in your allowance, new clothes, or argue about other financial matters.
Father, I had a feeling today.
Well, don't, son.
Okay.
Dinner time. Yes, Mother. Junior remembered to clean up.
You emasculating bint.
Hi, I'm Betty, and I'll be your wife tonight.
Well, this certainly is pleasant.
Brother seats Junior.
Daughter obsesses with the flowers.
Then helps Mother to her chair as he would his best girl.
The less said about this, the better.
Yeah. I got it, honey.
Junior seats Dad, and Sister seats the dog. And
Well,
the dog...
the dinner date has begun, and they're all happy about it.
Their stomachs knotted like fists. Dad, seen our waitress?
Many families throughout the country observe the custom of saying grace at mealtime.
Please, God, take me now.
It is always treated with reverence and respect.
Field Marshal Montgomery sits down to eat. Yes, it's smashing. It's a good day.
Napkins on the lap, the family awaits service. They converse pleasantly while Dad serves.
No, I'll just have
I said
saltine.
pleasantly, for that is the keynote at dinner time. It is not only good manners, but good sense.
Emotions are for ethnic people.
Pleasant, unemotional conversation helps digestion.
I can't stress unemotional enough.
Father serves Mother first, then daughter,
Let's go to the flow chart for this.
then the boys. Don't worry, fellas, you won't get left.
And be sure to make a plate for the narrator.
A violent argument erupts over whose day was more pleasant.
Can I have chopsticks, please?
Help cut your meat, Junior? Of course.
Ow, that's
By
my hand.
example,
Ow.
older children can teach younger ones good table manners.
Remember, always cut the meat of the person to your left.
You don't have to cut my mashed potatoes, too. But not the Jell-O.
No one starts eating until Father has served himself.
This means you.
Always wait for the hostess,
To seat you.
in this case Mother, to begin eating before you start.
Father feigns eating, draws Junior out, then
Let
disowns
Father
him.
and Mother guide the conversational trend if they desire. After all, they made all this possible, and may want to talk over their day with each other.
I'm moving to Fire Island, dear.
Tell Mother how good the food is.
Even as you gag on
Maybe
it.
Sis rates a compliment, too.
This stinks.
It makes them want to continue pleasing you.
After all, that's why God put women on this green earth.
Well, all this is good general advice, but there are some specific don'ts. Maybe the family will demonstrate for us. Don't monopolize the conversation and go on and on without stopping. Nothing destroys the charm of a meal more quickly.
And having a personality.
To say that the rest of the group is bored would be a gross understatement.
Mother, do something.
At least I have 2 sons.
Don't discuss unpleasant topics such as gruesome sights or sounds.
So then Sister Mary Patrick hit him up against
or
the wall and
unpleasant
nailed him.
occurrences. This is a time of pleasure, of charm, and relaxation, remember?
I have no son.
Don't make unkind comparisons about your stand of living. The dinner table is no place for discontent. It makes Dad and Mother uncomfortable and unhappy.
And they already dislike you enough.
Well, there it is. Spankings all around then.
Oh, and she was a big nun with a mustache and this huge black habit.
Don't insult your brother or sister with offensive remarks about friends. Arguments, harsh words mean tension and distress for everyone.
Yeah, go piss up a rope.
Sit and spin, you cruddy skank.
Perhaps booze would alleviate this situation.
Do remember simply this. Treat the other members of your family with the same respect and cordiality You would show your most treasured friend outside the family circle.
So Snapdad's bra?
This does not mean you should be stiff or formal. With your own family, you can relax. Be yourself. Just be sure it's your best self.
And be sure no one knows the real
This
you.
is better.
Father does his ferret impression.
Now things are on an even keel again.
And everyone wants to flee the seething cauldron of
Now
angst.
we're ready for dessert. Most families don't have maids.
They have daughters.
So mother needs help with the serving from the kitchen. Son says mother has done enough. Watch him play butler.
In remains of the day.
The removal of dishes from the main course and the serving of dessert set the stage for the conclusion of a thoroughly pleasant meal.
Probably should have washed my hands after handling that dead woodchuck. Oh, well.
More gin pop?
Do you begin to see now how a date with your family can be a truly special occasion?
Do you? Do
You know
you?
why brother and sister looked forward to the evening?
Well, do you? Better say yes, damn it.
When the dinner hour at home is treated with a certain amount of graciousness and ceremony, it can be memorable. There is no family so poor but that the evening meal can be eaten in an atmosphere of warmth and gentleness.
And control and repression.
There is no family so busy but that it can come together in the evening for a dinner date which will give its members something to look back upon with happiness all their days.
Yeah, this makes me want to heat up a Libby Land dinner and eat in front of the TV.
Now, enjoy some refreshments in the lobby.
Oh, boy. Oh, Smimmel Merve.
All right. So that was Mystery Science Theater 3000, by the way, and they have a series where they find 1940s and 50s serials and just kind of do their little commentary on it. Okay, so why Okin's addressing the issue of why attention to gender is comparatively new. She said, if you recall a few slides ago, that for a long time, economists and policymakers' primary unit of analysis has been the family, and generally families are male-headed, and that leaves a lot out. So, for example, it assumes this dichotomy between the public, for example, political and economical, and private spheres, private or domestic and personal, and it assumes that it's valid, or only the former is considered appropriate for public policy decisions. And this distinction between public and private, the problem is it fails to take into account the vast amount of work women do, since a lot of it is done in the private sphere. Well, so according to Okin, then, this is an instance where the difference between WASP women and women from poor countries is one of degree, not kind, though. Because that's still primarily here in the United States, and was for a long time. So yeah, it's just a difference of degree, not kind. Well, 3 reasons why it matters. First, Okin's going to argue, women matter. I don't really feel like this needs much defense. Second, equality of opportunity for women, girls and boys, is affected by the failure of theories of justice to address gender inequality. For example, single households headed by women, as opposed to men, are more likely to be poorer, which in turn affects both male and female children of single parents. And she provides a bunch of statistical evidence for that. 3. Failure to address just distribution within households is significant because the family is the first and usually most influential school of moral development. So children who grow up in households where there are gross inequalities between the sexes basically are likely to be influenced by that, and that will in turn affect their adult lives in both the public and private sphere, which, according to Okin, this data suggests a difference of degree, not kind. So, take a look at justice within the family then. She defends the sub-thesis that injustices are similar across cultures. For example, women's access to paid work is constrained by sex segregation and discrimination in the workplace, and by the assumption that women are naturally responsible for most of the unpaid household work. In these situations, in developed and non-developed world, more women's work is not paid than paid. Thus, the wide gap between men's and women's recorded economic participation. So economists are concerned with basically the type of work that can be exchanged for, currency, for, dollars, euros, money. Well, they're actually not necessarily the kind that can be exchanged, but the kind of work that is in fact exchanged for it. That leaves out a whole lot of other work that's done. And, the fact that women do an incredible amount of work throughout time and history and throughout the world. The saying, like, oh, my Suppose someone says, my wife doesn't have a job. She stays at home, takes care of the kids. That is a job. It's a very stressful, full-time, 24/7 job. Um, Women, yeah, basically they just do a whole lot of work that they're not getting credit for. Policy analysts aren't taking that into account when they develop these policies. And Okin's going to basically say, well, why not? They should. This impacts women's ability to become economically less dependent on men. Basically, if you're not working for income, you're working, you're just not getting income for it, it's harder to, you are dependent on the source of income, which is often the husband or whatever, boyfriend or whatever. Well, this is a problem here, as well as in developed and undeveloped countries. Mainly, when you have income, you have an easier exit strategy. And men who have the income, it's easier for them to walk away from families, whereas really hard for women to walk away from families when they have no income. And now, this isn't a statement in support of divorce. This is a statement about the fact that it is easier for men to just kind of abandon their families. And they do, frequently, in many parts of the world. It's a serious problem. So, one factor. Now, as you recall, Okin's argument is that this is primarily a difference of degree, not kind. She grants that there is one area where there's a difference of kind and not just degree. And this is only in non-developed countries. Non-developed countries usually, in non-developed countries where women are prohibited from paid work, they're going to be impacted in a way that women who are not forbidden from working aren't in terms of income source. So there is one difference. Alright, so she thinks that there's going to be two policy implications then. First, we should challenge the public-private dichotomization, at least with respect to policy. And second, the unit of analysis should be the individual, not the family. He thinks that's actually one way to policymakers can start improving a lot of women, or at least begin to start strategizing about it. Well, this also has implications for thinking about theories of justice. So she writes, and I quote, I have tried to show that, for feminists thinking about justice, John Rawls' theory, if revised so as to include women and the family, has a great deal to be said for it, and the veil of ignorance is particularly important. If everyone were to speak only from his or her own point of view, it is unclear that we would come up with any principles at all. But the very presence of the veil, which hides from those in the original position any particular knowledge of the personal characteristics or social position they will have in the society for which they are designing principles of justice, forces them to take into account as many voices as possible, and especially to be concerned with those of the least well off. So think about it. Suppose you don't know gender behind the veil, which is, I think, that is excluded from Rawls' theory of justice. Then you're not likely to select principles that would be unfavorable towards some genders, such as the female gender. Finally, it enables us to reconcile the requirement that a theory of justice be universalizable with the seemingly conflicting requirement that it takes account of the multiple differences among human beings. Thus is Okin's argument for essentialist feminism.